Welcome to the Gen Z Journey, where we work with you through an entrepreneurial lens to build a wholesome perspective on life and build both our business and personal dreams together. Join our community on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn at Gen Z Journey.
A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts. So, he loses touch with reality and lives in a world of illusions. By thoughts, I mean specifically chatter in the skull, perpetual and compulsive repetition of words, of reckoning and calculating. I'm not saying that thinking is bad. Like everything else, it's useful in moderation. A good servant, but a bad master. And all so-called civilized peoples have increasingly become crazy and self-destructive because through excessive thinking they have lost touch with reality. That's to say, we confuse science with the real world.
So, hello and welcome to another Gen Z Journey podcast. I'm just so excited for today's podcast, honestly. We're in collaboration working with the 2% podcast, which is a first time ever for the Gen Z Journey. I don't know about the 2%, we'll ask them in 1 minute. But I'm so excited, not only to be collaborating with them, but also to be talking about the topic we're talking this week on our kind of discussion, on our chinwag. So without further ado, I think we should just get straight into things. You guys should meet the 2% first, and then we'll get on to the topic of overthinking, which is the topic for this week. So, Ryan, Josh, I'd love you to introduce yourselves and introduce the 2% podcast so our listeners can get to know you.
Amazing. Cheers, Rio. No, great to be here and excited to chat about overthinking. So yes, I'm Ryan, one half of the co-hosts of 2%. So the 2% podcast is all about living life to the fullest. And it's under this idea that 2% of people they're doing exactly that. They're killing it. They're doing what they want to do. They're chasing their passions. And we decided to start a podcast around this topic because that's a super low number, and to then connect the dots around that as well. So to really interview those people and the people trying to become the 2% and to connect the dots around that. So really excited to be here today.
Absolutely. And Josh, go ahead, just introduce yourselves, the other half of the 2% podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, excited to be here, guys. So Josh Carwood here, one half of the 2%. And as Ryan said, so we set it up really with the mission just to interview these people that were actually living their life to the fullest, part of this 2%, not 2% of wealth or anything like that, but 2% mindset in terms of taking opportunities, embracing all that life has to offer, and really just finding out what makes these people tick and what keeps a smile on their face.
Hey, and the 2% mindset is a wealth in itself. You know, that's a wealth that you can't make through your work and your job. It's something that you make through the way you act and the way you think. So it's a wealth of its own.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's been a pleasure to meet these two gentlemen as well and see all the great stuff that they're doing with the podcast. It's why we wanted to get them on. And this week's article on the topic of overthinking is also in collaboration with them. We worked on it together and we produced it together. And I think it's a really great article for people to go and read. And then obviously if you're now listening to us here and listening to us discuss it, then that's excellent as well. But boys, let's get on to the topic of overthinking. I love this topic. It's a topic I have a very intimate experience with in my life. And so I think we should just kind of start around that. Like, let's define it. What is overthinking and how is it kind of dangerous or harmful to people?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So I don't have sort of a textbook definition, but in terms of overthinking for me, it's thinking beyond a point that is useful and that is positive, and when it sort of becomes negative on your energy. So for example, I think a lot of people can confuse overthinking with just thinking itself, and thinking in itself is a very useful thing. You need to think about the options, right? It's not just act immediately and don't think at all, but the point at which you're thinking becomes detrimental to your mental health, and you're thinking and thinking and thinking, usually in the past about something or in the future about something to come, that is when we can call it overthinking, and when it can be detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I actually have a perfect example for that. I'm actually currently working on my web development business with my partner, and one of the things that we're deciding on is branding. And branding, I can't tell you how much I've overthought branding for both Gen Z Journey and my new business, Unleash BP. It's been constant overthinking, and then I realized that I've wasted so much time and so much potential on overthinking rather than just acting and then working with what I have to improve it.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to give a shout out to our newest member that people are going to meet this week, actually, on this podcast. So we have our newest and our first female member of the Gen Z Journey has joined us over these past few weeks, and she's going to be introduced on the Sunday. And she, I would say, Aaron, I just ask you on this as well. Like, she's been amazing for us just to help stop overthinking in some senses as well. You know, me and you, we both have a tendency towards it. I know I definitely have a tendency towards overthinking things just on the simple level as well. It doesn't have to be too difficult. It can be things just like Instagram posts. You know, it's super easy to overthink the messaging behind like a caption or all of those kind of things. And for me, she's been really, really good at just like, you know, we don't need to think too much about this. Let's just write the caption and let's just go with it, you know. So I think that's been really good, a really good balance. So a shout out to her, and stay tuned to meet her on Sunday this week for a bonus podcast. But yeah, I just wanted to give that little plug in there.
Yeah, I love that. I think what you've referred to there is called decision fatigue, and it's a really interesting concept. So if you're not familiar, the idea is that you only have a certain amount of energy to put towards decisions every day. And as you make more and more decisions and you spend more and more time making those decisions, that energy level, the resources that you can put towards that decision making, that depletes. And so that's the part of the reason why it's not about the number of decisions that you make, but also the speed in which you make them is a really big factor. And so if you are thinking, right, I've got this to do, I've got that to do, I've got 100 things to do, you can get those 100 things done. You just have to do them twice as quick or 10 times as quick, you know. I think prioritization is always a massive thing, and it's often the most cited thing to be like, okay, you have to only do 3 things, 5 things. That's great, and it's a great tool, but people often forget about decision fatigue and just say, just do things faster.
Yeah, I have a question for you then, Ryan, because I actually quote Jeff Bezos quite often, and Jeff Bezos specifically states that he doesn't have meetings before 10 a.m. and he ends meetings usually by 2 p.m. but he only makes 3 decisions. So he believes that that it's actually better to make only a few decisions and allocate all his resources to those big decisions. So you say that it's important to make them quickly. What do you think about that and the other perspective of making good decisions and quality decisions and only making a few instead?
I think it's a balance. I think the quality of the decision isn't necessarily correlated to the speed. So you can make good decisions quickly. They're not mutually exclusive. I think it's probably also dependent on who you are and what you're working on. So, and also what the decision is, therefore. So if the decision is what to wear in the morning and you take 3 hours, well, you're doing something wrong. But if the decision is to, I don't know, to buy a new robotics company or whatever Amazon are up to, and yeah, fine, you probably can't do that in 15 minutes. But I think, yeah, I'm not Jeff Bezos, right? Like, if you're a busy CEO and you've got all of these things coming at you from your C-suite and it's in your inbox, it's on your desk, whatever, you have to make your meeting super important. So I get that. But I think it's finding the balance for you around making decisions that are of good quality, but also acknowledging that often you just aren't doing things quick enough. And if you do it 80% as good and twice as fast, that's better rather than taking a whole lot longer, you know?
Yeah, and I think you actually brought up a good point there of using the perfect example of choosing your outfit in the day. There's a prioritization. When I talk about someone like Jeff Bezos, he says that he makes 3 big decisions a day for Amazon, but in reality, he still has all his other daily decisions that he makes every single day. You know, something like changing his outfit or choosing his outfit for the day, I doubt he puts much effort into it. And that's an important concept to grasp, is that prioritization that you're talking about, and being able to understand, hey, you know, I shouldn't put half an hour into choosing my outfit and getting ready every morning. Let me put only 2 minutes into that. Let me use that half an hour instead to make that quality decision on how I'm going to manage my finances for my business, or how I'm going to bring on more clients, or whatever you decide to do for your bigger decisions of the day.
I think one of the important things to consider as well is the amount of people you bring in to help you with that decision. So increasing the number of people involved in the decision can help overthinking. Like you mentioned, at Gen Z, you've brought in this new girl and she's brought a new perspective in, and that's helped you to just make the decisions quicker because she's not as attached maybe to the outcomes. However, coming back to Jeff Bezos again, he also has a 2 pizza rule, I believe, which is that he'll only have a meeting if he can feed everyone in there with just 2 pizzas. And the reason for that is because if you bring too many people in the room and everyone's putting in their inputs, no decisions will get made at all. So there's a fine balance between listening to other people's opinions, taking them on board, having different perspectives, but not trying to please absolutely everyone, or again, you'll start overthinking and never make a decision.
Well, that's very unfortunate, because Jeff Bezos would never have a meeting with me then, because I'd have 2 pieces to myself. But I wanted to bring in a kind of another thing in this area. I've been watching a YouTuber over these past like kind of couple of weeks. He's called Nate O'Brien, and he talks about, he lives a minimalist lifestyle, right? And he talks about this overthinking, this headspace, and how that minimalist lifestyle creates that a lot. And I wanted to get your guys' kind of opinions on that, of what you think around it. So a rough summary of that minimalist lifestyle, you know, he doesn't have anything that he doesn't need, to the point in which, you know, he lives in a city. There's no point in him buying a bike because there's a potential of it getting stolen, or, you know, the cost of ownership of a bike. So he just subscribes to a bike rental each month. It's like $10 a month, and then he can just use these bikes in the city that they have. That's an example of that minimalist lifestyle, you know. Again, in the home, it's not having like clutter everywhere. Anything you don't need, it gets rid of. The desk spaces are very, very simple. The kitchen spaces are simple. And again, just, it's in the name, minimalist. It's you don't have the things you don't need. And again with an example of his clothing, he wears very, very similar stuff. He has outfits just in the wardrobe that he goes and picks out in the morning, so he doesn't have to waste time using that decision making energy on kind of more useless tasks of like what you're wearing or what you're eating in the morning or things like that. That's all prepped, all done, all planned, you know. So I wanted to get your guys' opinion on that. Like, what do you think about that minimalist lifestyle? How does that relate to overthinking and creating that headspace for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for me, it comes down to, what do you want to be minimalist for? And if you can't answer that question, you don't need to be minimalist. So for me, my desk space is really important. So I know that every day when I go to sleep and every time I get up, like my space where I work has to be clear at the start of every day. Whether that's just, I've just put everything in a drawer and I've just swept it all away, or I've dealt with everything for the day. Like, and that's just my preference. It's not minimalist, but it's clearing my sort of workspace to make more room in my headspace when I come to the desk every day. And I think if you apply that to other areas of your lifestyle, you have to think why and ask why. And so you don't have to wear the same t-shirt every day. You know, that's not what minimalism is about. But for that particular individual, wearing the same thing every day is something they don't care about too much. Whereas if you do care about it, then calm, you take as long as you want, you have as much choice as you like, because that's something you care about, but you might be minimalist in other areas. So yeah, I think you have to pick and choose how and where. And then if you want to take it to a further extreme and remove materialism and remove, you know, this kind of consumerism kind of things, I think minimalism gets a lot of stick for being anti a lot of things. I think it's not. I think it's pro everything else that it wants to accentuate, you know, and I think that's where people get the idea of it wrong. But yeah, there's a couple of 2 cents on that.
And I think the first thing that comes to mind for me from what you just said, Rio, and what you said, Ryan, is that technique that we spoke about in the article, the technique of labeling, and being able to have your thoughts kind of flow in your head, and then being able to label those thoughts and those ideas within your head, and be able to choose which ones you want to continue to exacerbate and develop in your life. You know, for some people, like you said, Ryan, some people will choose to take the time to choose their outfits for the day, and that might be someone that's a fashion designer. You know, maybe that's what their life is all about. But they might be minimalist in other areas of their life, like you said. For me, I think I'm a very minimalist person, and just the things that I bring into my life. I'm a very minimalist person in the amount of decisions and choices I make in my overall life, and I like bringing in good choices, but very small amount of choices. And you know, a lot of people like trying 100 different things in their life in the course of a year. You know, 100 different new activities just to see what they like and they don't like. For me, I like to take the time to pick and choose, and only choose one or two things to try out for that year. And I do it because for me that's how I work as a minimalist sense, and I do it because that's what I label as important for me. And so that's my take on what you just said.
Yeah, I like the fact that you've made a connection to the mind there, Aaron, because I was going to say that I think minimalism as a lifestyle is not for everybody in terms of getting rid of your possessions. Some people, you know, like to have different items. They like to keep things that they don't, you know, they might only pull out the attic every 5 years. But I think one thing that everybody can benefit from is taking a more minimalist approach to their mind, and trying to only keep in there what you actually need. For example, coming back to an example in the article around interview questions, you know, fill in your mind with 100 different variations of interview questions that may be asked is irrelevant information, because it's, you know, you don't know until you get there. But so trying to take that approach of having what's in your mind, what is necessary, I think that's where minimalism can be really beneficial to stopping overthinking.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I hadn't thought about it in that way, of just like, yeah, related just to the mind rather than your physical environment. And a lot of the time, the physical environment and your mental state is very kind of intertwined, more than you'd think, that's for sure. Which is why I liked, Ryan, what you said about, you know, your desk has to be clear in the morning when you wake up and when you go to bed in the evening, because that's just kind of a mind space, head space thing of just it, that represents your mind when you wake up and when you go to bed. Is you've done the task for the day, and when you wake up, it's fresh, ready to do those creative tasks, you know. And I think this is a great segue when we're talking about kind of that mind, headspace and stuff, is to talk about that very thing, headspace, the application. Ryan, Josh, Aaron, you're all big users of it. I actually don't have it, so I should maybe try it out. But definitely let's speak a little bit on that application and how that's helped you guys with your kind of your headspace and just reducing the stuff that you don't need in your mind.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Josh take the floor on that one, since he brought that up in the article, and I think it was a good segue to just understanding how to grow your mindset.
Yeah, no problem. So I think meditation for me, certainly, and for a lot of people, when it's mentioned, it can seem like a very daunting thing, like something unnatural almost, like what is this world? I know nothing about it. And I think Headspace and the team over there have done a really good job of creating an application that makes it very simple and helps explain it to beginners and get started in a very user-friendly way. And that can be as simple as learning their basic meditation packs, which is sort of guided. They talk you through just sitting there and listening to your thoughts. Or it could be even simpler, and you know, they have sort of soundscapes on there that you can just chill out to and take like a moment out of your day. But I think, yeah, the thing that I mentioned in the article was around noting, and what I really like about Headspace and the narrator on that is that they sort of predict what you're going to do. So I was sat there feeling really restless halfway through a meditation session, thinking, what am I doing? This is a waste of time. I'm going to get up and do something productive. And then he'll pop in my ear and say, don't feel like this is a waste of time. Just sit and chill out and listen to your thoughts. and you're like, oh damn, right, okay, like this is normal what I'm feeling, and they really sort of guide you through it and kind of hold your hand to begin with, and then the more you progress through it, the more comfortable you become with it, and you get sort of super users like Ryan who build up 200-day streaks. So
Yeah.
Ryan can sort of speak to you about the more sort of pro level meditation packs they have on there.
Yeah, and I actually want to bring up the fact that you mentioned that they really highlight when you're feeling impatient, because I had that same experience when I first started using Headspace, especially when I was going through the basic courses they have. They started off those meditations at only like 2 minutes, and then they upped it to like 5 minutes and 10 minutes. It's funny because once I hit that 5 minute mark, once I went past the first few basic courses, that 5 minutes, I felt that same kind of restlessness and that, oh, what am I doing? I'm wasting my time. This isn't going to help. But they almost knew how I felt, and they brought that up. And what I realized is that there is a reason for that feeling of anxiety and that feeling of being just restless during that situation. And it's because you're not used to listening to your own thoughts. And I think it's important to realize that that technique and that form of being conscious of what you're thinking about is a form of self-awareness. And you really need to be able to be self-aware to develop yourself as a person and develop a mindset that you don't have in this current moment. As you want to evolve your brain, it's just like when you go to the gym. You can't go to the gym for 5 minutes a day and expect to grow your muscles, right? You can't expect to go physically. And in that same aspect, you can't expect your brain to grow if you don't specifically train it to do what you need it to do. And so if you want to be self-aware, you have to teach your brain to be conscious and self-aware. And so that feeling of impatientness is the same thing as if you were going to the gym and you're like, well, I went to the gym for a week and why am I not swole yet? Why can I not lift 300 pounds yet? You have to realize that you have to take baby steps to become self-aware and become conscious of what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think in my mind, the way it works is you have to start with that principle of mindfulness, and then through that you can gain increased self-awareness, and then through that increased self-awareness you have more self-control, and that's kind of the kind of progression for me, or that's how my experience has been. And I want to caveat what Josh said earlier. I'm certainly not an expert on mindfulness or headspace or anything like that. I'm not, and I know a lot of people have built up streaks of years and kind of a lot longer than my time. But I think also the point is that it's not about the number at the same time. I think although Headspace and these kind of apps are gamified to the point where your streak, what little badges you've had, and you've got little reward videos, that's just to keep you coming back. That's kind of on the design, that's the UX stuff. That's not really how the principles are trying to teach you. So I'm quite detached from that. So Josh mentioned that I kind of achieved a very high streak, but then at the same time I fell off of it. I've come back from university and I've fallen away from it, and I'm not beating myself up about that. I'm just sort of going with the flow. I went a couple of weeks without meditating at all, probably even longer. I don't know. But now I'm just starting to get back into the flow of it. And I think as much as you should treat it as a muscle and a skill, it's also something, you're spending your time with yourself, and there are a lot of benefits to that. But at the same time, if it's not working, it's not working. And for me, I fell out of the routine. It didn't feel right anymore. And instead of pushing through that barrier, like you mentioned, of that restlessness, it was a different kind of barrier for me. But instead of resisting it, I just said, okay, I'm going to let go for a while. And that's absolutely okay. I think it's everyone has their own practice with meditation and mindfulness, and that was part of mine, and that was a big part of it. I think at one point in the early days, I was thinking, right, it's all about that end number, but sitting where I am now, it's not all about that. But then at the same time, there is a level of awareness that you can get to, having done a task repeatedly, especially on consecutive days for so long, where you do start to get insight into yourself, and those sort of things are really beneficial. So we're definitely back Headspace as a tool to become more mindful of yourself and your surroundings, and be able to relate to others better.
And I think that last question you had there, or that last comment leads to the perfect question that I was actually going to ask you. Do you feel that as you lost that meditation, that you began to replace that meditation with another sort of routine? Because you mentioned that, you know, it's okay to lose something like meditation, but I feel in my personal life that I don't always have to meditate to get that same feeling of self-awareness and that consciousness, that I can do it through just having a general routine or having some sort of thing that I can consistently do, because it leads to me looking more into the details of what I'm doing. Do you feel like you did, like you replace it with something else?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I wouldn't say I replaced the feeling. I think you can only, or at least for me, I could only repeat that feeling of, that immediate post meditation sort of peace or night euphoria in a way. It's quite a peaceful feeling. With meditation, I don't think I could replicate that. But for me, I sort of transferred the principles around labeling and noting and visualization, positive visualization, and the sort of techniques that Headspace kind of teaches you, being able to sit in silence, those kind of things, just transferring that to other parts of the day. So I would be more likely when I get up to just stare out of my window and not look at anything for a minute or for 2 minutes, rather than sit down and meditate. I'd be more likely to be more mindful about how my food sounds in my mouth and how it genuinely tastes, instead of shoving it in whilst I'm looking at my phone. Those kind of tweaks to your daily routine that I've felt began to not replace, but replicate the feeling in a smaller way. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I love that. And I think what we've really highlighted as well, just by sharing our experience of the whole meditation, is that actually one of the big things for like the younger generations as well is just sitting still and just being in your own thoughts for a little bit is kind of a scary concept, and something that people feel very trapped by. But actually, like, it's the most, like you said, euphoric, freeing. Like, it's one of the best experiences you can have. If you just sit down and try it and give it a go, I think there's a real big misconception among the younger generations, particularly, that it is kind of a very restrictive or trapping things. But if you speak to anybody that's done it, like ourselves, that's been through it, it's like it's totally the opposite. It's such a great experience and develops that self-awareness, which again frees you self in your daily life as well. Just in the fact of like eating, that was a great example.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's also a tool that, if applied to overthinking, to bring it back to that, it's as much about reducing the level of overthinking that you have as it is accepting the overthinking that you do. Because everyone's going to overthink. I think the whole personal development space is very reductionist in its approach. And actually, meditation is almost an antidote to some of that reductionism, because it's not just about taking things away. It's about just looking inside and accepting what's there. And that's the same principle when you are meditating, is that you're just sitting there with your thoughts and your thoughts come and go. That the analogy that Andy Puddicombe, the Headspace guy, uses is sitting at the side of a river and you just watch what's flowing by. And I think that's the same thing with overthinking. To use that analogy again, the river's just flowing faster, and then it will start flowing slower again later. If you remove yourself as that sort of external participant within your mind and your thoughts, it's a different perspective that changes your attitude to accepting that you're going to overthink.
Yeah, that's some huge value right there. That's huge. That's amazing. That was a great. I saw Josh's little clap as well, just to appreciate that.
Unbelievable stuff, Ryan. And I think also that when the man loses a 200-day streak and just says he's just going with the flow, that's when you know he's a truly enlightened being.
Enlightened being. I love it. I love it. Oh, good. And so the final kind of topic that I want us to chat on and discuss is this idea around linking overthinking and perspective. I think this is just a huge topic. You guys brought up the 2% mentioned in the article. They mentioned Eckhart Tolle, great guy, got some great books out there as well. One of our previous guests, right at the very start, a guy named Brian Dunkel, he brought him up as well and brought his books up. So you can, if you want to hear more of his experience on Eckhart Tolle and the whole mindfulness stuff, then go and listen to that podcast. But I wanted to talk on that, just us, about perspective related to kind of overthinking, because that's been, from my experience, I'll just share mine real quick. That's been a huge thing for me in the whole overthinking stuff. I used to overthink so much, like just a crazy amount, and it was so restricting. Until I gained the perspective of actually, you know, those little problems, issues you think you have are actually just really not a thing. Like, if you just choose to release them and let them go, oh my God, it's so freeing, and you don't need to overthink them. And actually, the technique I use for this, I still use it to this day, and it's something I just realized when I did it. But around here in California, we're blessed with some absolutely beautiful kind of viewpoints, some that are particularly really high up. And I always found that whenever I went up a mountain, whenever I hiked up somewhere, and I was kind of just above a lot of what was going on in the day-to-day, you know, you're above your city, you're above your town, you're looking over a big expanse of space. It gave me just the perspective of kind of how small I actually am in this world and how little my problems matter. And once you view life from that point of view, then it's like, well, it's actually really freeing, because, okay, yeah, I am experiencing some struggles here and there in my day-to-day, and I can work through them and speak to people about them, whatever it is. But in the grand scheme of things, it's okay that they're there. And that whole thing that, Ryan, you were just talking about in terms of, you know, meditate, we take that kind of reductionist approach, but actually meditation is also about looking inside and just kind of accepting what was there. That's what that really gave me. It's just like, okay, yeah, these things are here, and these are problems and issues that I'm facing sometimes, but the emotions that I get caught up with them in my day-to-day are actually not too important, and I don't need to place too much emphasis on them. So that was my experience of kind of just gaining perspective on kind of overthinking and my issues with it. But what's been your guys' experience, and how have you developed that perspective around overthinking?
I'd like to actually go first on that. So, speaking of that same metaphor that you use of just looking down at a city and seeing how big that city is, and how minuscule you can be in comparison to that city, that same way, that same kind of perspective can actually be brought into the way you think and overthinking. You know, when you take that outsider perspective and you start to be conscious of that overthinking and what you do, it's the same kind of idea. You realize that there's so many possibilities and so many things that can occur, but when you start to look at it, you know, if you look at that city and you stare at it and you're like, wow, look at all these buildings, and you take the time to look at every single building and look at the details of every single building, you'd be up there staring at that city forever, you know, for years to come. But with that being said, you know, you have to take in the city as a whole and look at it and observe it and be happy with it, and then move on. And then that same way, you have to kind of look at your thoughts, and you have to not be stuck in the nitty gritty of what you're thinking, and be able to just look at your overarching thoughts and look at what the bigger idea is and why these thoughts are occurring. You know, if we go back to the article idea of that interview, you know, you don't want to be stuck in every single possibility of every interview question you have, but rather you just want to say, okay, I'm going into this interview and this is my goal, so I'm going to achieve it by just going in and doing the best I can through this situation, and being prepared by knowing my strength, knowing my weaknesses, knowing what the role is that I'm going into, but not thinking of every single question. What if they ask me this situation, or what if they ask me that situation, and I don't know how to answer it? So, you know, you have to take a step back from the detail to stop overthinking.
And I think one little thing that just popped into my head as well around my experience with overthinking is really not trying to cut the branches of the problem, but, you know, get into the root of the problem. And I think if someone's listening to this and thinking, I really struggle with overthinking, I think it's important to bring up that overthinking is often a symptom of anxiety. And if you've really struggled with overthinking and never really thought of anxiety or yourself as an anxious person, that is something to definitely look at, because someone like myself, you know, I don't have anxiety, like panic attacks or any sort of major symptoms, but there's certainly, you know, mild symptoms of anxiety, and overthinking is definitely one of those. So I just say that because if you sort of Google overthinking treatment or, help, like there probably won't be too much out there. But if you sort of go back to anxiety and real, again, it's a bit of a self-awareness thing. Oh, this is what I'm prone to. You might find some more help out there for you.
Yeah, I say that. I think it's all about recognizing patterns then, isn't it? And that sort of whether you can see what's repeatedly something that you're thinking about over and over again, to kind of recognize your own overthinking, because once you've recognized it, you can deal with it. Some thoughts on perspective. I think perspective, there are kind of three key areas for me that leap out through my experience. Perspective through recognizing what you can and can't control, and that again refers to what I just said. Perspective through infinity, which I think is the sort of general sort of looking at the city, looking at the horizon, looking up at the sky, kind of seeing yourself as part of a bigger picture, rather than being sort of withheld within yourself, almost to think of not just, oh, I'm the author of my own story and this and that, but how you don't affect others. If you see actually that others affect you and you affect others, but also there's a much bigger world outside of you, that's very freeing. And perspective as mortality as well as the final one. I think it can be quite a dangerous and hard place to be when you consider that you might not be awake tomorrow, or your family might not be, or anything like that. And it can be a morbid place to be and think as well, but it's also the most liberating in that actually it forces you to take risks. It forces you to understand what you believe in, what you want, what you care about, and act towards that as soon as you can. And so understanding your own mortality and the finite nature of life is again another sort of perhaps more profound way to look at perspective and use it as a tool to help you do what you want to do.
For sure. That's massive. That's a massive part of mindset. And I think, Josh, I really like what you said about kind of people if they're experiencing that and it might actually be anxiety. And I would really love for people just to send, like, DM, email, send in a video, whatever it is. If people are going through something, like they feel like they're stuck on their kind of mindfulness journey, or they feel like they really have an overthinking problem or something, I'd love to hear from you. We'll keep you 100% anonymous. We respect that kind of privacy, but we'd love to hear from you, and perhaps we could just at one point go over it on Instagram or something, and we could just bring up these questions that people have, and we can share our experiences from our journeys. We can get some other people in on it, maybe some more experts in the field, and get them to speak on it, because it would be really nice just to hear from people and hear how they're actually experiencing this topic. Like, how is overthinking affecting their daily lives? Like, what impact does it have, and how they're overcoming it? So definitely, if anybody has any questions or they want to just talk and comment on this topic, then write into either the 2% podcast or us here at the Gen Z, and we'd love to hear from you, and we can collaborate again and answer these questions. But I think for now, for this week's discussion, this week's chinwag, we've spoken enough about it. I think this is a great topic. There's so much to discuss about it. We've only kind of just scratched the surface, but I'd love to continue this conversation, like I said. Join us this week for the interview podcast that will be going out on Friday in 2 days' time. And then, like I said, we've also got a bonus one coming out on Sunday where you can meet our brand new team member. And we also, in this podcast, we spoke about mindset and meditation a lot. And that's actually going to be next week's topic. We've got some experts in the field in that coming in to do the article for us and to come in and speak about it, as well as interviewing them later on in the week. So really excited for next week and what that has to deliver. So definitely stay tuned and listen in for that. But without further ado, I think we'll finish as we always do.
Cheers.
Cheers
for now.